What would you do if a being of pure light told you secrets about Jesus that no church in the world has ever taught? Secrets about healing that could forever change everything you believe about miracles, divine power, and the sacred abilities hidden within your own soul. The revelation I'm going to share today will give you chills in the most profound way possible. So subscribe here to Stories of Light so you don't miss more encounters like this one. Now, prepare yourself for a discovery that challenges everything we think we know about Jesus' true mission on Earth.
Taos County, New Mexico, November 9th, 1993, 2:18 in the morning. Elena Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the old fire lookout tower she called home, unable to sleep. At 38 years old, she had learned that sleep was a luxury grief rarely afforded. 3 years since the helicopter crash that took her husband Miguel, and the nightmares still came with clockwork precision. The tower had been Miguel's dream, a 1940s fire lookout they'd planned to restore together. Now Elena lived there alone, surrounded by his unfinished projects and the vast silence of the high desert. She was a flight nurse, or had been. 15 years of emergency medical evacuations, saving lives at 10,000 feet. But after Miguel's crash, she couldn't bring herself to fly anymore. Now she worked ground ambulance in Taos, a step down that everyone was too polite to mention. Elena wrapped her blanket tighter against the November cold and looked up at the night sky. That's when she saw them, lights that shouldn't exist. They weren't stars, they weren't aircraft. They moved with impossible fluidity, weaving patterns across the sky like dancers in some cosmic ballet. Elena's medical training immediately supplied rational explanations: satellites, weather balloons, atmospheric phenomena. But then, one of the lights began to falter. It was subtle at first, a flickering, like a candle struggling against wind. Then the movement became erratic, desperate. Elena watched with growing alarm as the light descended rapidly toward the mesa behind her tower. Her flight nurse instincts overrode 3 years of grounded caution. If something was crashing, if someone needed help, she grabbed her medical kit and flashlight, threw on her jacket, and ran. The mesa trail was treacherous in darkness, but Elena knew every stone from years of grief walks. Her flashlight beam cut through the night as she climbed, lungs burning in the thin mountain air. When she reached the top, Elena stopped dead. A depression in the earth, circular and perfect, as if something had pressed down on reality itself. At the center lay a figure, not human. Elena's breath caught. The being was roughly human-sized, but wrong in ways her mind struggled to process. Skin that seemed to hold its own light, like moonlight made solid. Eyes that were too large, too luminous. Crystalline structures that caught and refracted her flashlight beam. And it was wounded, badly. Strange fluid, not blood. Something that glowed faintly silver seeped from injuries across its torso and left arm. Elena's medical training warred with primal fear. This couldn't be real. This was stress, PTSD, a psychotic break finally catching up with her. But the being turned its head and looked directly at her. "Elena," the voice spoke, not in her ears, but directly in her mind, clear as a bell. "Please, I am injured. I need help." Elena's world tilted. You're in my head. How are you?" I communicate through consciousness. My name is Lyra. My vessel was damaged. I managed to reach the surface, but I am hurt. Will you help me?" Every rational thought in Elena's mind screamed to run. But 15 years of emergency medicine had trained instincts deeper than fear. Something was hurt. Someone needed help. "Can you walk?" Elena heard herself ask, her voice steadier than she felt. "With assistance." Elena approached slowly, medical assessment overriding terror. The being, Lyra, was roughly 5'8", slender, with that impossibly luminous silver skin. The wounds looked like burns, but with patterns Elena had never seen. "My tower is 10 minutes from here. I have medical supplies. Can you make it that far?" Lyra nodded, a surprisingly human gesture. Elena helped the being stand. Lyra was lighter than expected, and there was a warmth, not heat, but something else, like standing near something deeply alive. The descent was slow, surreal. Elena supported an alien being down a mountain trail in the middle of the night, her mind reeling with impossible questions. When they finally reached the tower, Elena settled Lyra on her living room couch and immediately went into medical mode. She'd treated everything from gunshot wounds to cardiac arrests at 12,000 feet. Surely she could manage whatever this was. "These wounds," Elena said, examining them carefully. "What caused this?" "Energy discharge from my vessel's failing systems, similar to your electrical burns, but operating on different principles." Elena worked methodically, cleaning the wounds with antiseptic. The glowing silver fluid responded to treatment much like blood, clotting, sealing. But there was something else happening, something Elena could feel but not see. "You have healing ability," Lyra observed, watching Elena work. "Beyond your medical training. I can sense it." Elena paused. "I'm just a nurse." "You feel patients' pain, physically. You always have." Elena's hands froze. She'd never told anyone about that. The strange empathic sense that let her know where patients hurt before they could tell her, the way she could feel their distress in her own body. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because you are doing it now," Lyra said gently. "You are feeling my pain, absorbing it, trying to heal it with intention you don't realize you're projecting." Elena stepped back, suddenly dizzy. "This isn't happening. I'm having a breakdown. 3 years of grief finally catching up, and now I'm hallucinating aliens in my living room." "You are not hallucinating, Elena Rodriguez. I am real. And I have come to your world many times, though rarely with such dramatic arrival. But perhaps this crash was meant to be. Perhaps you needed to meet someone who could tell you truths about healing and divinity that your world has forgotten." "Truths about what?" "About the one you call Jesus of Nazareth. About who he really was, what he truly taught, and why those teachings about divine healing power within all humans were buried by those who preferred you remain dependent on external authority." Elena felt her legs weaken. She sat heavily in her chair, staring at the wounded being of light on her couch. "You're going to tell me about Jesus?" "I am going to tell you the truth about Jesus. And when I am done, your understanding of healing, miracles, and your own sacred potential will be forever transformed."
Elena Rodriguez had not always been the hollow woman living alone in a fire tower. haunted by grief and grounded by trauma. At 38, she could still remember the girl she'd been, full of fire, convinced she could save everyone, determined to prove that a woman from a traditional New Mexican family could soar as high as any man. Born in Santa Fe to a family that had farmed the same land for 6 generations, Elena was the youngest of 4 children and the only daughter. Her 3 older brothers had followed their father into ranching, but Elena had always looked up instead of down. While her brothers studied soil and cattle, Elena studied clouds and sky. "That girl has her head in the heavens," her grandmother used to say, shaking her head with fond exasperation. "She'll either fall hard or fly higher than any of us can imagine." It was the latter for a time. Elena's path to nursing began at 15, when her eldest brother Carlos was thrown from a horse and broke his back. The local paramedics who arrived changed everything for Elena. She watched them work with calm efficiency, transforming chaos into order, panic into hope. That was the moment she knew. She wanted to be the person who showed up in crisis and made things better. Her parents were skeptical. "Nursing is good," her mother Maria had said carefully. "But you could be a teacher, stay close to home, have a normal life." But Elena had never wanted normal. At 18, she enrolled in nursing school at the University of New Mexico. She excelled, driven by something her instructors called extraordinary clinical intuition. Elena could walk into a room and immediately sense the most critical patient, could anticipate complications before they manifested, could feel where people hurt in ways that transcended what they reported. "Elena has a gift," her clinical supervisor, Dr. Patricia Sandoval, had written in her evaluation. "She practices medicine as if she can see beyond what instruments tell us, as if she can sense the suffering itself." Elena had always attributed this to careful observation and experience. She never told anyone about the strange sensations, the way she could feel patients' pain in her own body, the way trauma seemed to leave tangible impressions in the air around injured people, the way she sometimes knew someone would crash before monitors showed any warning. She was too practical, too grounded in science to believe in anything supernatural. These were just well-developed nursing skills, nothing more. It was during an emergency room shift in 1985 that she met Miguel Rodriguez. He'd come in with a hiking injury. Nothing serious, but serious enough to need care. He was a helicopter pilot for the Forest Service, fighting wildfires from the sky. They talked while she wrapped his sprained ankle, and Elena fell in love with his stories of flying over burning forests, of seeing the world from perspectives most people never experienced. "You should come up sometime," Miguel had said, his dark eyes warm. "See New Mexico the way the eagles see it." 3 months later, they were married. 2 years after that, Elena made a decision that would define her career. She became a flight nurse. It was the perfect fusion of everything she loved: emergency medicine, the intimacy of small team dynamics, and finally, the sky she'd always been drawn to. Flight nursing was intensity compressed into a helicopter cabin. No backup, no hospital resources, just a pilot, a paramedic, and a lama racing against time to save lives. Miguel flew her to emergencies across New Mexico. They worked together like parts of the same organism. Miguel handling the aircraft with precision that bordered on art, Elena performing medicine in conditions that would paralyze less experienced nurses. "We're good at this," Miguel used to say after particularly successful rescues. "You and me, we save lives from the sky." How many people can say that? For 8 years, they did exactly that. Elena's medical intuition, already remarkable, seemed to amplify during flight operations. She could predict which patients would crash, which injuries were more serious than they appeared, which interventions would work when protocol suggested otherwise. Her colleagues noticed it. "Elena has a sixth sense," observed Tom Bradley, the paramedic she worked with most frequently. "She'll be treating someone for trauma, then suddenly turn to a patient we haven't even assessed yet and say, 'Check his potassium,' or 'Watch for cardiac involvement.' And she's always right. It's spooky." Elena deflected these observations with humor and humility. Inside, she wondered what was happening to her. The sensations were getting stronger, the ability to feel patients suffering, to sense problems before they manifested, to know things she had no rational way of knowing. Sometimes, late at night after difficult calls, Elena would confide in Miguel. "I feel like I'm becoming something I don't understand, like there's something opening in me and I don't know what it means." Miguel would hold her close. "You're becoming the healer you were always meant to be, Amor. Don't be afraid of your gifts. The world needs people like you." But then came October 15th, 1990. A routine wildfire transport. A sudden mechanical failure. Miguel fought to control the helicopter as it spiraled toward Earth, trying until the last second to find a safe landing spot. Elena had been scheduled to fly that shift, but had switched with a colleague to attend her niece's quinceañera. The other flight nurse died with Miguel when the helicopter crashed into a canyon wall.
The guilt was immediate and crushing. She should have been there. If she'd been on that flight, maybe her intuition would have warned them. Maybe she could have sensed the problem before it became catastrophic. Maybe her strange abilities could have saved them. Instead, she'd been celebrating while Miguel died doing what he loved, with someone else in the seat that should have been hers. The grief counselors told her this was survivor's guilt, a normal trauma response. But Elena knew better. It wasn't guilt. It was the devastating certainty that she'd had abilities she didn't understand, had been too afraid to trust them, and that fear had cost Miguel's life. After the funeral, Elena couldn't fly anymore. The thought of being in a helicopter, of trusting mechanical systems that could fail, of risk, it paralyzed her. She took a ground position with Taos County EMS. Her colleagues were supportive, understanding. No one questioned a widow's inability to return to the work that killed her husband. But Elena knew the truth. She wasn't avoiding helicopters because they'd killed Miguel. She was avoiding them because she didn't trust herself anymore. Her intuition, her strange abilities. What good were they if they couldn't save the person who mattered most? The strange sensations continued, but Elena shut them down. When she felt patients' pain too intensely, she forced herself to focus only on observable symptoms. When intuition screamed that something was wrong, she ordered tests to confirm before acting. She became the most protocol-following, by-the-book nurse at Taos EMS. Elena's changed, her colleagues noticed. She's competent, but it's like something died with Miguel, like she's going through the motions. They weren't wrong. Elena moved into the fire lookout tower, Miguel's dream project,
the place they were supposed to restore together. She told people it was practical, that the isolation helped her heal. Really, it was punishment. Living in Miguel's unfinished dream, surrounded by reminders of plans they'd never complete, alone with guilt that never dimmed. For 3 years, this was Elena's life. Work shifts at Taos EMS, return to the tower, sit with her grief. The strange sensations she'd once possessed seemed to fade, or maybe she'd just gotten better at suppressing them. She told herself this was good, that she was healing, that she was moving forward, but she was dying inside, one gray day at a time. Elena Rodriguez, at 38, was a woman who had touched something extraordinary and then deliberately let it go because she was afraid of what it might mean, what it might demand of her. She had healing abilities she refused to acknowledge, intuition she wouldn't trust, and a grief so profound that it had convinced her that the safest thing was to live small, stay grounded, and never again reach for something she might lose. It was exactly this combination of suppressed gifts and profound loss that had prepared Elena for the most transformative encounter of her life. Without knowing it, she had spent years developing abilities that transcended conventional medicine, then burying them under layers of grief and self-protection. She was a healer who refused to heal herself, a woman with extraordinary intuition who no longer trusted her perceptions, a soul capable of touching the divine who had convinced herself she deserved only darkness. On November 9th, 1993, all of that was about to change. Over the next 3 days, Elena cared for Lyra with professional competence while her mind reeled with impossible questions. The being of light recovered remarkably fast. Wounds that should have taken weeks to heal closed in days. But there was something else happening, something that unsettled Elena more than the impossibility of an alien in her living room. Every time she touched Lyra during wound care, Elena felt it, that old sensation she'd spent 3 years suppressing, the ability to sense suffering, to feel another being's pain and distress. But with Lyra, it was different, clearer, more precise. "You are feeling my cellular regeneration," Lyra observed during a bandage change. "Your consciousness is interfacing with mine at the level of biological systems." Elena's hands paused. "I'm just checking your wounds." "Elena," Lyra said gently, "you have been suppressing your abilities for 3 years, since Miguel died. You blame your gifts for not saving him, so you shut them down. But they never went away. They're just sleeping." Elena stood abruptly. "You don't know anything about Miguel. I know that you loved him. I know that he died when you were not present. I know that you carry guilt that is slowly destroying you from within." Elena's crystalline eyes reflected light in ways that seemed to see through Elena's defenses. "And I know that Miguel would be heartbroken to see what you have done to yourself in his name." Elena felt tears burn her eyes. "You have no right." "I have every right to speak truth," Lyra interrupted, her mental voice filled with compassion. "Because I was sent here specifically for you, Elena Rodriguez. Your prayers, your pain, your suppressed abilities, they created a resonance that called to beings like me across vast distances. You summoned help without knowing it. And now I am here to tell you what you need to hear." Which is what? That Miguel's death was not your fault, that your abilities could not have saved him. His death was complete, instantaneous, beyond any healing. That you are meant for something far greater than grief, and that the being you call Jesus came to earth to teach humans exactly what you possess, divine healing abilities that transcend physical medicine. Elena sank into her chair, overwhelmed. Why Jesus? Why do you keep bringing up Jesus? Because, Lyra said, Jesus was one of us. During the following days, as Lyra healed under Elena's care, the being of light began to reveal information that would fundamentally challenge everything Elena thought she knew about Jesus, healing, and the true nature of human spiritual potential. Elena, Lyra said one evening, as they sat in the tower watching sunset paint the New Mexico sky in impossible colors. Before I share what I know about Jesus, you must understand something about the nature of consciousness and physical form. Elena listened, her medical skepticism warring with growing curiosity. Your species believes that consciousness is produced by the brain, but the reverse is true. Consciousness is primary. It creates and sustains physical form. Your brain does not generate consciousness. It focuses and limits it to allow experience within physical density. That goes against everything I learned in medical school. I know. Your medical establishment studies the body as if it were simply a biological machine. But what if I told you that every physical condition, every disease, every injury, every malfunction has its origin not in random biological failure, but in disruptions of consciousness? Elena struggled with this. Are you saying all disease is mental? Not mental, consciousness-based. There is a difference. Consciousness includes but transcends what you call mind. Elena shifted, her luminous form casting strange shadows. This is what Jesus came to teach. This is what made his healing abilities so extraordinary, and why those abilities were suppressed by later religious institutions. Jesus was a healer. The Bible says so. Everyone knows that. Yes, but do you know how he healed? Do you know what he was actually doing? Elena shook her head. Jesus was not channeling power from an external God. He was demonstrating a fundamental truth that human consciousness, when properly aligned, could directly influence physical matter, including the biological systems of the body. Every healing Jesus performed was a lesson in this principle. But Jesus was the Son of God. He was special, unique. No, Lyra said firmly. This is the distortion. Jesus explicitly taught that he was not unique, that the abilities he demonstrated were latent in all humans. Do you remember his words? These things that I do, you will do also, and greater things than these. He was not speaking metaphorically. He was literally teaching that every human possesses dormant abilities to heal, to manifest, to transform physical reality through consciousness. Elena felt her worldview tilting. If that's true, if Jesus taught this, why can't everyone heal like Jesus did? Because the knowledge of how was suppressed. After Jesus' death, religious organizations discovered that keeping people dependent on external authority was more profitable than teaching them their inherent power. The techniques Jesus taught, specific methods of consciousness focus, emotional alignment, and energetic direction, were gradually removed from doctrine. What remained was worship of Jesus as an unreachable deity, rather than recognition of Jesus as a teacher
demonstrating human potential. Lyra stood, her luminous form glowing more brightly. "Elena, I am going to teach you what Jesus taught. I am going to show you the healing techniques he used, not as miracles, but as practical technologies of consciousness that any human can learn." "Why me?" "Because you already possess the abilities. You've felt them your entire life. You've suppressed them out of grief and fear, but they are still there, waiting. And because the world needs healers who understand what Jesus actually taught, not the distorted versions that religion has preserved." Over the following hours, Lyra began to explain concepts that challenged everything Elena understood about medicine and healing. That illness often originated in unprocessed emotional energy that crystallized in physical tissues. That the human body possessed innate wisdom and self-healing capabilities that were normally suppressed by fear and doubt. That love, not romantic love, but a specific frequency of unconditional acceptance, was the most powerful healing force in existence. That Jesus had taught specific techniques combining focused intention, emotional alignment, and conscious direction of energy that could facilitate healing at the cellular level. That the separation between healer and patient was largely illusory. That healing involved a merging of consciousness that transcended individual boundaries. When Jesus touched sick people, he was not imposing healing upon them. He was aligning his consciousness with theirs, elevating their frequency to a level where disease could not maintain coherence. He was teaching them to remember their innate wholeness. And anyone can do this? Anyone with proper understanding and practice. The abilities you possess, Elena, your empathic sensing, your intuitive knowing, these are the beginning stages of what Jesus mastered. You feel others suffering because your consciousness naturally extends beyond your physical boundaries. This is not aberrant. This is a capacity that all humans possess to varying degrees. Elena's mind raced with implications. If this is true, if Jesus taught this, why has no one? "Many have known," Lyra interrupted. "Throughout history, there have been healers who rediscovered these principles, but they were often marginalized, called heretics, or had their teachings absorbed and distorted by institutions that preferred maintaining authority over empowering individuals."
So you're saying the church has been lying? Not lying exactly. More like preserving incomplete truths while suppressing transformative knowledge. The church teaches love and compassion, which is good, but it does not teach the specific consciousness technologies that Jesus demonstrated. It does not teach humans that they possess inherent divine abilities. It keeps the focus external, on God out there, on Jesus as unreachable deity, rather than internal, on the divine potential within each person. Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the vast New Mexico night. Everything Lyra was saying challenged her Catholic upbringing, her scientific medical training, her entire understanding of reality. But deep inside, beneath layers of grief and suppression, something was awakening. A knowing, a recognition of truth that transcended rational thought. "Lyra," Elena said quietly, "if you're going to teach me these things, I need to know they're real. I can't just take your word. I need proof." Lyra's luminous face arranged itself into what might have been a smile. "Of course you do. You are a scientist, a nurse, a practical person. You need direct experience, not abstract philosophy." "Yes." "Then tomorrow," Lyra said, "I will demonstrate. I will show you healing principles that Jesus used. I will teach you how to consciously direct the abilities you already possess. And you will experience directly that what I am telling you is not belief or faith. It is practical knowledge about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical form. Elena nodded, fear and excitement warring in her chest. She was about to discover that the grief, suppression, and loss that had defined her last 3 years were not the end of her story, but the preparation for its most extraordinary chapter.
Despite the extraordinary experiences of the previous days, Elena Rodriguez found herself drowning in doubt. Each night after Lyra rested, Elena lay awake in her bed, mind spinning through increasingly desperate attempts to explain away what was happening. "I'm having a complex psychotic break," Elena told herself on the 4th night. 3 years of untreated PTSD, isolation, grief, it's finally manifested as elaborate delusions. There is no alien. I'm talking to myself. I'm caring for a hallucination. She went so far as to photograph Lyra with her Polaroid camera, thinking the image would expose the delusion. But the photograph showed Lyra exactly as Elena saw her: luminous, impossible, real. Elena stared at the photo until dawn, unable to reconcile it with any rational explanation. The Catholic guilt came next, heavy and familiar. If she accepted Lyra's revelations about Jesus, what did that mean for her faith? "I'm being deceived by something demonic," Elena thought during a particularly dark moment. "The devil appears as an angel of light. Isn't that what Scripture says? This being is tempting me away from true faith with heresy about Jesus." She dug out her rosary, the one her grandmother had given her, and tried to pray. But the prayers felt hollow compared to the living truth Lyra radiated. Elena realized with dawning horror that Lyra's explanation of Jesus made more sense than the theology she'd learned in church. And that realization terrified her. If the church was wrong about Jesus' teachings, what else was wrong? If consciousness can heal, what does that make me? Elena struggled with this during her EMT shifts. "I spent 15 years studying medicine. I dedicated my life to science-based healing. Am I supposed to throw all of that away?" The idea that her medical training might be incomplete, not wrong, but insufficient, threatened her professional identity. She was Elena Rodriguez, flight nurse, emergency medical specialist. If healing involved consciousness technologies beyond physical medicine, who was she? Why would I be chosen for this? The question haunted her. I'm nobody special. I couldn't save my own husband. I've spent 3 years hiding from life. There are thousands of better healers, more spiritual people, more qualified candidates to receive this knowledge. This doubt was perhaps the deepest, the conviction that she was fundamentally unworthy of the revelations Lyra offered, that her grief, her failures, her suppressed gifts made her unsuitable for whatever Lyra intended. What if Lyra teaches me these abilities and I can't use them? Elena worried. What if I try to heal someone and fail? What if I hurt someone because I'm playing with forces I don't understand? The weight of potential responsibility was crushing. If she truly possessed healing abilities beyond conventional medicine, every person she couldn't help every death she witnessed would become a personal failure. Better to remain in ignorance than to know she possessed power she couldn't properly wield. Elena imagined trying to explain this to anyone, her colleagues, her family, her church. I sheltered an alien who told me Jesus taught consciousness healing technologies, would make her sound completely insane. She'd lose her job, her medical credentials, her family's respect. She'd become the crazy woman in the fire tower who claims to talk to angels. The isolation would become complete. At least now, people thought she was simply grieving. If she embraced Lyra's teachings, they'd think she'd lost her mind. This was perhaps the most painful doubt. For 3 years, Elena had built an identity around loss and limitation. She'd accepted that she would always be the widow, the grounded flight nurse, the woman who couldn't save the person she loved most. Lyra offered the possibility of transformation, of awakening abilities, reclaiming suppressed gifts, becoming the healer she'd once touched the edges of being. And that hope was terrifying. What if I try and fail? What if I open myself to these abilities and discover I still can't heal the things that matter? What if I let hope in and it destroys me when it doesn't pan out? Grief was safe. Suppression was familiar. Hope was the most dangerous thing Lyra offered. During the darkest hour of doubt, Elena actually considered calling the county mental health crisis line. Maybe she needed psychiatric hospitalization. Maybe medication could make the alien disappear. But then Lyra appeared in her doorway, luminous and patient. "The doubts are normal, Elena," the being said gently. "Every human who awakens to their true nature goes through this resistance. Your mind is protecting you from transformation because transformation requires death. Death of old identities, old limitations, old comfortable stories about who you are." "I don't know if I can do this," Elena whispered. "I know. That's why tomorrow I will show you, not tell you, not teach you through words, show you through direct experience that cannot be explained away."
The demonstrations began at dawn. Lyra had recovered almost completely, her luminous form now radiating health rather than injury. "Elena," Lyra said, "today you will experience 5 demonstrations of the healing principles Jesus taught. Each will show you a different aspect of the abilities that exist within you. First," Lyra said, "I will show you how Jesus perceived illness. Close your eyes." Elena obeyed, skeptical but willing. "Now, I want you to feel your own body. Not observe it analytically. Feel it. Where is your attention naturally drawn?" Elena's awareness moved through her body and settled, surprisingly, on her right shoulder. It didn't hurt exactly, but there was a quality of discord there. "Good," Lyra said. "Now, open your eyes and tell me what you sensed." "My right shoulder feels off. Not painful, just wrong somehow." Lyra nodded. 3 years ago, during the first weeks after Miguel's death, you developed chronic tension in that shoulder. You compensated in your movement patterns, creating misalignment. Currently, you have early-stage rotator cuff inflammation that, if unaddressed, will require surgery within 2 years. Elena stared. How could you possibly know that? I perceived the energetic disruption the same way you just did. And Elena, you have never mentioned this shoulder issue to any doctor. You've ignored it because it seemed trivial compared to your grief. But your body just told you the truth, and you heard it. Elena rotated her shoulder, suddenly aware of the chronic tension she'd been suppressing for years. Lyra was right. She had been ignoring it. This is how Jesus diagnosed. He felt energetic disruptions before they manifested as obvious physical symptoms. This is why he seemed to know things about people he'd never met. He was sensing the truth their bodies carried.
Next, Lyra said, something simpler to observe. She directed Elena to a half-dead cactus on the windowsill, one Elena had been meaning to throw out. Place your hands around this plant. Don't touch it, just hold your hands near it. Now, feel genuine care for this struggling life. Not pity, not obligation, actual unconditional acceptance and desire for its well-being. Elena felt foolish, but she tried. She thought about how hard it was for anything to survive in the harsh desert, how this little cactus had struggled against odds, how it deserved to thrive. Warmth built in her hands, not physical heat, something else. Now, Lyra said softly, intend for it to receive what it needs. Don't force, don't push, just intend and allow. Elena focused on the cactus, feeling something flowing from her hands. Energy? Consciousness? She didn't have words for it. When she opened her eyes, the cactus looked different, not dramatically transformed, but subtly more vital. The graying sections had a hint of green. The withered parts seemed less shriveled. Jesus did this with a fig tree, Lyra said, though the biblical account misunderstood his demonstration, recording it as a curse rather than a healing. He was teaching that consciousness could directly influence biological systems, not through physical intervention, but through directed intention and love. Elena stared at her hands, trembling. Now, Lyra continued, the most important demonstration, healing yourself. She directed Elena to examine her right shoulder again, the one with chronic inflammation. I'm going to guide you through what Jesus taught for self-healing. First, place your left hand on your right shoulder. Feel the discord you sensed earlier. Elena did. The wrongness was palpable now that she was paying attention. Now, I want you to do something that may feel strange. I want you to thank your shoulder for carrying this burden for 3 years. Thank it for trying to process grief through physical tension. Thank it for holding pain you weren't ready to feel emotionally. Elena's eyes welled with tears. She hadn't realized how much anger she'd carried toward her own body for being weak, for hurting, for not being enough. Thank you, she whispered to her shoulder. Thank you for holding this for me. Good. Now, the most important part. Direct unconditional love, pure acceptance, pure compassion toward this part of your body. This is what Jesus meant by love thy neighbor as thyself. He was teaching that the same love you extend outward must first be directed inward. Elena focused, feeling warmth build under her palm. The discord in her shoulder began to shift, softening,
releasing. After 10 minutes, the chronic tension was gone. Not reduced, gone. Her shoulder felt looser, freer than it had in 3 years. This is self-healing, Lyra said. Jesus taught his followers these exact techniques, but over time, the knowledge was lost or suppressed. What remained was the command to love without the practical instruction on how to apply love as healing technology.
Distance, Lyra said, is an illusion of physical perception. At the level of consciousness, all beings are connected. Jesus demonstrated this when he healed the centurion's servant without being physically present. She asked Elena to think of someone she knew who was suffering. Elena immediately thought of her colleague, Tom, a paramedic who'd been struggling with chronic back pain for months. Focus on Tom, Lyra instructed. Don't visualize him as broken. See him as whole, healthy, his true nature beyond physical limitation. Now extend the same loving intention you used on your shoulder. Send it to him. Elena felt ridiculous, but she tried. She focused on Tom, sent feelings of wellness and healing, imagined him free of pain. That's enough, Lyra said after several minutes. When you see Tom next, observe. 2 days later, Tom pulled Elena aside at work. Strangest thing happened, he said. My back pain, the one I've had for months, just vanished 2 nights ago. I woke up and it was gone, like it had never been there. Elena stared at him, chills running down her spine. The final demonstration came during Elena's next ambulance shift. Lyra had taught her a technique. Before assessing any patient, take 3 breaths and ask her consciousness to show her what was truly wrong. The call came at 2 a.m. Elderly woman, possible heart attack. When Elena arrived, the woman's vital signs were stable. EKG showed minor irregularities, but nothing critical. Elena took 3 breaths and asked. Suddenly, she knew, with absolute certainty, that the real problem wasn't the heart. It was a pulmonary embolism that hadn't shown up on any monitor. We need to treat for PE, Elena told her partner urgently, right now. But her lungs sound clear. Trust me, please. They treated for pulmonary embolism during transport. By the time they reached the hospital, the woman crashed, massive PE, exactly as Elena had sensed. The treatment they'd started saved her life. The ER doctor later told Elena, I don't know how you knew. Nothing in her presentation suggested PE. But if you hadn't started treatment when you did, she'd be dead. Elena sat in the ambulance afterward, shaking. This was real. All of it was real.
That night, Lyra shared the deeper truths, revelations that would completely transform Elena's understanding of Jesus, healing, and human spiritual potential. Elena, Lyra began, you are ready now to understand who Jesus really was and why he came to earth. Jesus was not the unique son of a distant God, Lyra explained. He was what we call a starseed, a highly evolved consciousness that voluntarily incarnates on developing planets to accelerate spiritual evolution. Beings like Jesus exist throughout the cosmos, serving as teachers and way-showers for younger species. Elena struggled with this. So Jesus was, what, an alien? Jesus was a consciousness that transcended planetary origin.
He had evolved beyond the need for physical incarnation, but chose to embody in human form to demonstrate possibilities that exist within all humans. His mission was to show humanity that what you call miracles are actually natural abilities that emerge when consciousness operates from its true nature. Jesus was never alone, Lyra continued. Throughout his life, he maintained telepathic communication with a council of evolved beings, what you might call angels, though we are simply consciousnesses operating from less dense dimensions. These beings guided his mission, helped him navigate the challenges of physical limitation, and supported his teaching work. The times when Jesus withdrew to pray, Lyra revealed, he was engaging in these consultations. What appeared to his followers as communion with an external God was actually Jesus accessing the cosmic network of consciousness that exists beyond physical perception. Every healing Jesus performed was a demonstration of consciousness principles. When he touched sick people, he was aligning their energetic frequency with the pattern of perfect health that exists as potential within all beings. He wasn't imposing healing from outside. He was reminding their bodies of their innate wholeness. Lyra revealed that Jesus had taught specific techniques: diagnosis through energetic sensing, feeling disruptions in the field; emotional clearing, what Jesus called forgiveness of sins; frequency alignment, what Jesus called faith; conscious direction of healing energy, what Jesus called laying on of hands; and remote healing through consciousness connection, what Jesus called praying for others. The tragedy, Lyra said, was that these practical techniques were largely lost. What remained in religious tradition was worship of the miracle worker rather than instruction in the miracles themselves.
When Jesus taught, "Love one another," he was not offering moral philosophy. He was teaching precision technology. Love, not romantic love, but unconditional acceptance and compassion, generates specific energetic frequencies that automatically align biological systems with optimal function. This is why Jesus emphasized love so constantly. It wasn't sentiment, it was practical instruction for accessing the most powerful healing force in the universe. When you operate from genuine, unconditional love, you literally channel divine creative energy that can reorganize matter at the molecular level. Jesus' resurrection, Lyra explained, was a planned demonstration of advanced consciousness principles. He did not die in the way humans understand death. He consciously withdrew from physical form and then reconstituted it to prove that consciousness is primary and matter is secondary. This was his final teaching, that physical death is not the end of consciousness, and that the same creative power that maintains life can overcome even mortal injury when properly directed. After Jesus' physical death, Lyra explained, his followers initially continued teaching these practical methods. But as institutional religion formed, leaders realized that empowering individuals threatened organizational control. If everyone knew they possessed inherent divine abilities, they wouldn't need priests or churches or religious hierarchy. The teachings were gradually altered. Jesus became an unreachable deity rather than an example of human potential. Worship replaced practice, belief replaced direct experience. But now, Lyra said, her luminous form brightening, Earth is entering a period where these truths can be restored. Consciousness on your planet is shifting. More humans are spontaneously developing abilities like yours: energetic sensing, intuitive knowing, healing capacities. This is not random. It is the natural evolution of your species, supported by beings like me who serve as reminders and teachers. The knowledge Jesus brought is being reintroduced, not through new revelation, but through awakening of abilities that have always existed dormant within human consciousness. You, Elena Rodriguez, are one of thousands of humans awakening to these abilities during this critical period. Your role is not to become a guru or religious figure. Your role is simply to demonstrate, through your work as a healer, that the principles Jesus taught are real, practical, and available to any human willing to develop them. You will heal people in ways that transcend conventional medicine. You will teach others not through preaching, but through example. You will be a bridge between the scientific medicine you've learned and the consciousness-based healing that Jesus demonstrated. And most importantly, Lyra concluded, you will forgive yourself for Miguel's death, release the grief that has imprisoned you, and reclaim the gifts you suppressed, because the world needs healers who understand what Jesus actually taught, not the distorted versions preserved by institutions that fear human empowerment. Elena sat in silence, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd learned. Everything she'd believed about Jesus, about healing, about herself, all of it had been transformed. Why me? She finally asked. Why was I chosen? You weren't chosen, Elena. You chose. Before you incarnated in this life, your consciousness agreed to serve as a bridge builder during this period of awakening. Miguel's death, painful as it was, cracked you open in ways that prepared you for this work. Your medical training gave you credibility. Your suppressed abilities gave you potential. Your grief gave you compassion. Everything in your life has prepared you for what comes next. And what comes next? Lyra smiled, her luminous eyes reflecting impossible light. You become the healer you were always meant to be. You remember who you truly are, and you help others remember as well.
Over the following months, Elena underwent a profound transformation that unfolded in 9 distinct stages, each building upon the last to create a completely new way of being. The first transformation was simply accepting that everything Lyra had shared was real. Elena stopped trying to find rational explanations and allowed herself to embrace the impossible, that beings of light existed, that consciousness could heal, that Jesus had taught practical methods for accessing divine abilities. This acceptance didn't come easily, but each time Elena used the techniques Lyra taught and saw undeniable results, resistance crumbled. Reality was larger than she'd been taught. That was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. The second transformation was releasing the crushing guilt over Miguel's death. Through Lyra's guidance, Elena came to understand that Miguel's death had not been preventable, that her abilities could not have saved him, that carrying guilt was dishonoring his memory rather than honoring it. She performed a private ritual at the crash site, speaking to Miguel's spirit, finally saying goodbye. The weight she'd carried for 3 years dissolved, leaving space for something new to emerge. With guilt released, Elena's suppressed abilities returned with remarkable speed. The empathic sensing she'd shut down roared back to life. Her intuitive knowing about patients' conditions became consistent and reliable. Her hands seemed to radiate healing energy whenever she touched someone
with genuine compassion. She no longer fought these abilities or tried to explain them away. They were simply part of who she was, tools she'd been given to serve her purpose as a healer. Elena began consciously integrating Lyra's teachings with her medical training. She didn't abandon conventional medicine, she expanded it. She used energetic diagnosis to supplement physical assessment. She applied consciousness-based techniques alongside standard protocols. She taught patients self-healing methods to complement their medical treatment. The results were extraordinary. Patients healed faster, required less medication, reported not just physical improvement, but emotional and spiritual well-being. At first, Elena's expanded abilities were inconsistent, brilliant one moment, inaccessible the next. Stage 5 was developing reliability through practice. She learned to enter healing states of consciousness deliberately. She developed protocols for different situations. She discovered how to maintain capacity even when tired or stressed. This was less dramatic than miraculous healings, but more important, consistency made the difference between having occasional abilities and being a genuine healer. Elena began quietly teaching colleagues the techniques she'd learned, not by announcing she'd been taught by an alien, by simply sharing what worked. A nurse struggling with burnout learned energy-clearing methods. A paramedic with chronic pain learned self-healing techniques. An ER doctor, skeptical of anything alternative, started using Elena's diagnostic approach and couldn't deny the results. Knowledge spread through demonstration rather than doctrine, exactly as Jesus had taught. Elena's identity transformed from medical professional to consciousness healer working within medical systems. She understood her role wasn't just treating individual patients, but serving as a seed planter, demonstrating possibilities that others could then develop. She began writing detailed notes about her methods, documenting cases, building a knowledge base that could be shared more widely. The scientific part of her wanted evidence. The spiritual part of her knew truth would speak for itself.
The penultimate transformation was developing direct connection to what Lyra called Source, the fundamental consciousness that underlies all existence. Elena learned to access guidance not just from Lyra, but from the larger field of wisdom that Jesus had tapped into. This wasn't about religion or dogma. It was about learning to tune into information and energy that existed beyond her individual consciousness. When working with patients, Elena increasingly felt guided by wisdom that transcended her personal knowledge. The final transformation was the most profound. Elena became a walking demonstration of unconditional love. Not emotional love, but the frequency Lyra had described: acceptance, compassion, genuine care for the well-being of all beings. Patients felt it immediately. Colleagues noticed. Even strangers sensed something different about her. Elena radiated a quality of presence that made people feel safe, seen, and inherently valued. This was what Jesus had embodied. This was the Christ consciousness that religious traditions spoke of but rarely understood. Not divinity separate from humanity, but humanity operating from its highest potential. Elena Rodriguez, at 39, was barely recognizable as the grief-hollowed woman who'd stood on a fire tower deck 1 year earlier. She had become what Lyra called a conscious healer, someone who could work within conventional systems while accessing abilities that transcended them.
She still lived in the fire tower, but now it felt like home rather than punishment. Miguel's unfinished projects no longer mocked her. They reminded her that life was always unfinished, always becoming, always offering new possibilities. She still worked for Taos EMS, but her role had expanded. Patients specifically requested her. Supervisors noticed her extraordinary outcomes. Quietly, without fanfare, Elena was transforming emergency medicine in her region simply by being who she'd become. And most remarkably, she could fly again. 6 months after meeting Lyra, Elena took her first helicopter flight since Miguel's death. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She understood now that nothing was truly lost. Consciousness continued. Love transcended death, and the work she was meant to do required her to reclaim all parts of herself.
Elena's transformation brought revolutionary understanding that redefined her perception of healing and human potential. She came to see that physical disease often originated from unprocessed emotional energy. Illness wasn't punishment, but information, the body communicating imbalances that needed attention. She understood now that she wasn't healing anyone. She was facilitating conditions where people could heal themselves, creating a field of possibility where consciousness could remember wholeness. Prayer transformed from religious ritual to practical technology for accessing guidance beyond individual awareness. What culture called miracles were simply natural outcomes of consciousness operating from higher frequencies. Jesus hadn't suspended natural laws. He demonstrated more complete laws that included consciousness as causal factor in physical reality. Most profoundly, Elena experienced that love wasn't just emotion, but fundamental force of the universe. When she treated patients from genuine, unconditional love, healing accelerated dramatically. This was the core of Jesus' teaching, not moral philosophy, but practical technology for accessing the most powerful force available to human consciousness. 5 years after meeting Lyra, Elena had become a quiet legend in northern New Mexico emergency medicine. Her outcomes were statistically impossible. Patients survived injuries that should have been fatal, healed at rates that defied medical explanation. The local hospital began documenting the Rodriguez effect, measurable improvement when Elena was involved in care. Tom Bradley, the paramedic she'd healed remotely, became her first student. Together, they began informal training sessions for EMS workers, never mentioning aliens or consciousness technologies, simply teaching practical methods that produced results. Within 2 years, 15 medical professionals were using similar approaches. Patient satisfaction increased, medical errors decreased, provider burnout reduced significantly. Elena's personal life transformed too. She met Robert Chen, an acupuncturist whose Eastern training complemented her expanded understanding. They married 3 years later, both devoted to healing work. The Fire Lookout Tower became a gathering place for monthly workshops where medical professionals learned consciousness-based techniques. Lyra maintained periodic contact through meditation, confirming Elena was fulfilling her purpose beautifully. "You have become what Jesus demonstrated," Lyra told her, "a human operating from divine nature while grounded in practical service. This is the bridge your world needs." By age 43, Elena had trained over 50 health professionals. Some were skeptical testers, others passionate converts, all quietly revolutionizing their medical practice. The broader medical community remained unaware of what was happening in northern New Mexico, but those who worked with Elena had glimpsed something extraordinary. Elena often reflected on her transformation from that November night. The grief-hollowed woman she'd been had to break completely before rebuilding into something stronger. Miguel's death had cracked her open. Suppressing her abilities created pressure that made their return explosive. Her medical training gave her credibility. Her skepticism ensured she'd test Lyra's teachings rigorously. Jesus had taught this through resurrection metaphor. You had to die to be reborn. Elena had experienced it literally. Death of who she'd been, rebirth into who she'd always had potential to become.
You who are listening to this story live in a time when Elena's experience is happening to thousands worldwide. Abilities once rare are becoming common. Knowledge that was suppressed is being rediscovered. Jesus' teachings are being remembered and restored. If you've ever felt drawn to healing, whether as medical professional or someone who wants to help, Elena's journey suggests you carry similar potential. Her abilities aren't unique. They're latent capacities within human consciousness, waiting to be awakened. If you've experienced moments of inexplicable knowing, sensing what someone needs before they tell you, feeling others' pain, having intuitions about health that prove accurate, these aren't coincidences. They're signs your consciousness perceives beyond conventional senses. If you work in healthcare and notice patients do better when you genuinely care, when you hold healing intention, when you treat them with unconditional acceptance, this isn't merely psychological. You're accessing the principles Jesus demonstrated. Your compassion generates frequencies that facilitate healing at biological levels. The revolution Jesus attempted 2,000 years ago is happening now, not through religious institutions or new dogmas, but through individuals like Elena, who quietly demonstrate what's possible when consciousness-based healing integrates with practical service. You don't need to abandon science. Elena didn't. She expanded her practice to include consciousness factors conventional medicine ignores. The synthesis is what matters, honoring both rigorous methodology and subtle dimensions instruments can't measure, but human awareness can perceive. You don't need dramatic, mystical experiences. Elena's transformations came through patient daily practice, learning to enter healing states consistently, developing diagnostic sensitivity through attention, strengthening capacity to channel love frequency through intention. The path is simple, though not easy. Operate from unconditional love. Develop sensitivity to consciousness dimensions of health. Practice accessing guidance beyond individual awareness. Direct healing intention through your work. Trust abilities that emerge even when they transcend rational explanation. This is what Jesus taught.
not through complex theology, but through demonstration of human potential. Every healing he performed was an invitation. You can do this too. This is your birthright. Remember who you truly are. Elena remembered. Thousands are remembering. Are you ready to remember as well? And you, who have just heard Elena Rodriguez's journey from grief-hollowed nurse to conscious healer, channeling Jesus's abilities, have you experienced moments where your compassionate presence facilitated healing beyond medical interventions? Have you felt you carry capacities you don't fully understand? Leave in the comments your experiences with moments when healing emerged from something beyond physical medicine. You may discover you carry more potential than you've recognized. If this story about rediscovering Jesus's true teachings resonated deeply, subscribe to Stories of Light and activate notifications so you don't miss other encounters revealing how light beings help humans remember their divine nature and sacred abilities. Share this video with healthcare workers, spiritual seekers, or anyone questioning what else might be possible beyond what conventional systems teach. The awakening Elena experienced isn't unique. It's part of a global shift where humans remember capabilities that always existed but were long suppressed. Remember, in a universe where consciousness is primary and love is the most powerful force, the only limits to your healing capacity are those you choose to accept. Jesus didn't perform miracles to prove he was special. He demonstrated possibilities to show that you are sacred, that divine abilities exist within you, that healing is your birthright when you remember who you truly are. The beings of light are here, guiding the awakening. The question isn't whether you have abilities like Elena developed. The question is, are you ready to stop suppressing them and finally remember the divine healer you were always meant to be?